Dear listeners, since we recorded this week's episode, a terrible tragedy unfolded in Tumbler Ridge. Our most solemn prayers go out to the students, staff, family members, first responders, the community, and all those impacted by the mass shooting event. We note that BC's party caucuses and the legislature have agreed to declare a day of mourning, and the planned throne speech will be cancelled. In its place, the Lieutenant Governor will deliver a speech dedicated to the people of Tumbler Ridge. So please consider making a donation and making a difference to Tumbler Ridge during this challenging time. This week's pre-recorded episode of Hotel Pacifico follows. Hello, guests. But we're missing a Geoff today. Geoff Meigs is away, but we've recruited what I hope will be a suitable replacement, Michael Gardiner. Michael, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
It is good to finally join you here, and to have the honor of starting as a co-host on the first day is exciting and a cause of a little trepidation.
Well, this could be one and done for you, so don't get too excited. But two Michaels, what could possibly go wrong? So for our listeners, Michael, you're a man of mystery, but in BC politics, you've done your tour of duty as provincial secretary of the NDP. You're a consultant around town, so you're bringing a lot of political backstory with you to the conversation today.
Well, and I had the pleasure of working with Geoff Meigs back when he was communications director in the Glenn Clark Premier's office, so the connection runs through.
Well, I'll try not to hold that against you. Well, later in the strategy suite, Michael and I will be discussing the upcoming BC legislative session, yellow light on confidence as green turns red, dueling Geoffs on DRIPA, and the return of Rustad. But first, our special guest, two-time guest to Hotel Pacifico, Bridgitte Anderson, CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Welcome, Bridgitte.
Well, thank you for having me back. What a pleasure to be here for a second time.
Well, you're never far from our thoughts. There's a lot going on in your life as usual with what's going on in the economy, what's going on with this government, what's going on in the city. But I just want to go back a year. Last year, you were advocating for a 3% GDP growth target for British Columbia. You wrote about it in the past week or two in the Vancouver Sun in an op-ed. How's it going so far on getting to 3%?
Not well. And when we launched the 3% challenge, the agenda for economic growth, it was in January, and we could see a little bit what was coming down the pike in regards to some of the Trump tariffs. And we thought it was still important to put that marker down because governments need to set targets and need to reach targets, just like people do in the business community. You think about anybody who works in the private sector, they have to set monthly, annual targets, and they have to report usually to a board or maybe perhaps to a CEO on how they're tracking on those targets. And so we thought it was really important, even though we knew there was going to be upheaval. I don't know that we anticipated the kind of upheaval that we saw, but setting that target would mean $4 billion by 2030 for government revenues for health and education. And you can see the kind of spending that's happening in government, yet there's no public confidence in the kind of services that people are getting. And the kind of spending is out of control. We're talking about the highest spending per program per individual since 1965. A deficit that is historic, and really no end in sight to see where there's going to be some path to some fiscal responsibility and accountability.
Well, you're getting right ahead of the agenda here to the budget. I was going to just be all Mr. Soft and go tiptoe through the tulips here, but let's just go straight to the budget. You had Brenda Bailey on at the Board of Trade last week. Or in the last couple of weeks, and she said that after this budget is released, she's going to be the most unpopular person in British Columbia. So what was your takeaway from that?
I wasn't surprised with what the finance minister said. I think that she is in a very difficult situation. And we all should brace ourselves. This is going to be a brutal budget. If you look at what the situation is, just setting the stage for it, we have slowing economic growth. I think the projections are around 1.3% for GDP growth. We have declining population. We have revenues that are in decline in many natural resources and forestry, particularly when you look at what's happening in forestry. And so when you start to put that together, and then the certainty that has just evaporated in the business community around a whole bunch of other issues, which we'll probably get to as well. The government is now have, I think their deficit is, we don't know, we won't know till budget day, but over $11 billion. And,
Over 14 if you
what are
count the
the
tobacco
levers? So,
settlement.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
Auditor General would disagree with that $11 billion. But, when you're putting a budget together, what are your options? You have to cut or you have to find ways to increase revenue. So there's very few levers available to this government right now because the situation has become so dire. I mean, remember back a few years ago, there was a surplus, and now we're sitting in a deficit situation. And while the government talks about increasing revenues, and to their credit, they have done some good things, but it's not enough and it's not fast enough. And I don't know how they're going to get us out of this.
Do you see, well, first of all, I want to, Michael, jump in here. Like when you heard the Brenda Bailey comments too, like what do you think of the government's positioning on this?
Well, I think, and I'm hopeful that the finance minister is positioning it as bad as it can be in advance of the budget, and that we're going to see some hints and some daylight of optimism for the future coming out of this budget. And I wonder, with some of the major projects that have been approved recently, if Bridgitte, if you think that we're not 1, 2, or 3 years away, but some of these projects that are now being approved, the major mines, some other projects that are coming on the private sector side, St. Lissams and others, are we seeing a down the road curve that may provide some cause for optimism versus just the straight pessimism that we're in this death spiral of deficits now?
Yeah, you make a good point, Michael, because the government has done some things that needed to be done. They're speeding up the permitting. We're seeing much more on the mining investment, the mutual recognition when it comes to internal trade, and BC really led that file. So those are all bright spots. Although mutual recognition, there's a lot more work to be done, but that's other provinces have to come on board. But a lot of those revenues, we're not going to see an upside for several years from now. So I think the important question for me going into this budget is what can the government do immediately in the next 1 to 3 years to really start to turn things around? And we have been advocating for a long time, and this might be counterintuitive given the budget deficit that we're all facing, but we've been advocating for a PST exemption on machinery and equipment. And why this is important is that we have the data to show that we're sitting in a very uncomfortable place in British Columbia comparatively to Alberta. Our highest marginal tax rate, effective tax rate, is 25.6%. I think Alberta's about 12%. So if there was the exemption, and this is a bit tax nerdy, but if there was an exemption on machinery and equipment, companies would put that back into their operations. It would send a signal that BC is open for business. And there's data to show that actually those funds do end up, that employees get higher wages, that there is more investment. So my concern going into this budget is that the government won't take an avenue like this, and they're thinking, the only thing they can do to solve this fiscal problem is to raise taxes. And what that will do for affordability for individuals and for business sentiment will be devastating.
Well, this morning on Global, Paul Finch from the BCGU was on, and he said a couple of things that caught my attention. One of them was, and I quote him, to put it simply, I think the politicians lost control of the bureaucracy for a while, and I think they're trying to right that ship. Pretty amazing quote from the BCGU head. And in fairness to Finch, I think he was mainly speaking about non-union or excluded members. But I think broadly speaking, I think there's a lot of heads nodding. Secondly, he also said, look, we have this deficit, but 2.8 billion of it is the carbon tax is missing, and it hasn't been replaced. So I guess interesting comments from both the spending and the revenue side from Finch this morning. So on that, then, I mean, where do you see the balance between the spending measures and the revenue measures? Like in terms of bending this down. Now, obviously, on the revenue side, some of that can be accomplished through growth and through GDP, 3% GDP growth. Um, but should the carbon tax have been replaced, or are we going to have to do it all through austerity and fiscal restraint?
Well, there's so much in that I'm trying to unpack,
Yeah,
but I mean, we all know that there has been almost no private sector job growth in British Columbia for some time. And so the public sector has become this big machine, as was mentioned. And so we do have to make some changes there. The government is going to have the courage to cut back on the public sector and find ways to do that that doesn't impact, for example, health services, which are already in dire
half the
straits.
budget.
Half the budget. So
Yeah.
that's a very difficult position to be in. I recognize that. But, I might run a small organization, but our members run much larger organizations. And there's always bloat in organizations. And so the government needs to be really strategic about that and make the cuts where it will impact the bottom line, but not impact frontline services. So that's one. When we look at the cost that it is to service the debt, over $5 billion. $5 billion. So that is more than double the amount the province is supposed to be spending on child welfare services. This has become unsustainable. So then looking at what they need to do for growth and for revenue, yes, they're on the right track where it's increasing permitting and getting these projects going. That's good, and that is going to take some time. But other things, with the other policy piece that we have been talking about for a long time is around the 50-50 rule. And this is about food processing. And it might seem strange that the Board of Trade has been a real advocate for a change to this rule, but it's because there's $1 billion of investment sitting on the sidelines. And those companies won't come in and invest in British Columbia unless there's a change to that rule. So it is about sending the right signals to businesses to say we are open for business. So the 50-50 rule, the PST exemption, what other indicators can the government give the private sector that we're welcoming investment on the same path that provinces like Alberta are? Alberta rolls out the red carpet. British Columbia consistently has obstacles and challenges that need to be removed, and it's very difficult to do business in British Columbia. And there are some things that could be done relatively easy to address those.
It is interesting when you look at Paul Finch and his comments, given the settlements that the BCGU have driven are in part significantly responsible for the size of the deficit, not just the increasing size of the public sector, but the increasing cost of the public sector. Of course, many of those are on the front lines, but we have wage settlements at 3% that seem to be the benchmark over the coming years. The last round added about $8 billion to government costs. This round is going to add, call it $4 billion. Is your 3% target ambitious enough anymore?
The 3% target is ambitious, but we thought it was a line in the sand that was really important. And we looked at it, historically, if you will, because back in the 80s, it was, and actually in the early 90s, we were achieving 3% annual GDP growth. So it isn't unreasonable, but it takes a kind of fiscal discipline that I don't think we've seen in this province in some time. And it needs to be a much more concentrated effort on the growth piece, as well as, the tax competitiveness side, the permitting side. And I recognize that government doesn't do anything very quickly, having been part of government myself, but the world has changed and things are moving so rapidly that I get a sense that that is part of the issue with this government, with the EB government, is that it can't execute quickly enough for what we're seeing happen in real time in the real world.
So, arguably there is momentum on some of these major projects. Certainly, the EB government's changed its tune on LNG, and there's certainly a found religion on critical minerals and mining. So, that those are things that could, you know, yield some benefits, as Michael was saying. In a few years from now, might start seeing the curve go up. But amidst all that, you kind of were thrown a curveball this past 6 months over the Cowichan ruling and the Gahatla ruling. Um, in terms of message it sends to investor confidence. But before I make too many assumptions, how big a deal has that been in terms of BC's reputation as a place to do business in terms of all this jurisprudence coming out of the courts?
It's significant on a number of fronts. One, around business certainty is the big one. Is investors and even landowners in British Columbia, current landowners, aren't sure where they stand right now, and that is a significant issue. So there's that. But the other piece I think is really important is the impact that these rulings have had on reconciliation. When I think about the kinds of business deals that are happening and have been done with our members of the Board of Trade, they're in housing and they're in natural resources, and there's proof that economic reconciliation, Indigenous reconciliation is working and it's good for everybody. It is the only path forward, but this uncertainty has to be addressed. And one of every single conversation I've had in the last 6 months or more has been around this and the impact that it's having. And a lot of the concern is not just about the uncertainty right now, but the legal wrangling that is going to take years to go through. I mean, it is the reason why we join forces with other associations to apply for intervener status on the Cowichan ruling because of the economic impact and the uncertainty. We won't know whether we get that status for some time, but it was really important for us to give a voice to the business community together in a unified way to say this is having a huge impact on investment, on land ownership rights, and the economy of our province.
Guess sovereignty isn't just a buzzword anymore. It's a necessity. When the rules of trade have changed overnight, Canadians have realized pretty quickly that we need to invest in ourselves. The good news? Many Canadian industries with Canadian workers are already producing the materials and services that Canada needs. It's in this context that the Government of Canada announced its Buy Canadian policy, and the Government of BC announced its Look West strategy, both designed to help make the BC and Canadian economies stronger and more resilient to global shocks, all while supporting our own workers and businesses. Now more than ever, presenting sponsor TELUS is proud to be BC's hometown team and a Canadian leader in technologies owned and controlled end-to-end in Canada. They've been investing in Canadian technology for years, and that's why their sovereign AI factory is built with security, sovereignty, and Canadian values in mind. But TELUS knows there's still more to do and will continue working with both the governments of Canada and BC to ensure businesses and workers are supported here at home. Now is the time to highlight how industry and government can work together to ensure policies put our homegrown businesses and the people who work within them first.
Any other stink bombs out there that you're concerned about in terms of investment confidence, or are you seeing more bright spots?
It's a really difficult time. I think you just have to look south of the border and just recognize that kind of chaos. And every single day, there's something else that comes, and trying to think about the impact that that has on Canada, on British Columbia, and try not to be in too much of a reactionary mode. And then even looking at what's happening, internationally. That's what I was maybe mentioning, is that things are moving so quickly that it's very hard for businesses to make decisions because they don't know what's going to come around the corner in 3 months from now, or maybe even a month from now. So that underlying certainty, which is the foundation for so many business decisions across all sectors and industries, has just been eroded on so many levels that it is a very, very difficult time. I came into this role about 4 months before the pandemic, and I was thinking about that because it was such a time of uncertainty. I actually think there's more uncertainty now because it's coming at us from so many different sides. It's a really, really challenging time.
You were in the news this week trying to go on offense as opposed to playing defense. And there's an announcement with you and the Premier about attracting a defense bank. That's something I'd never really heard anything about before, about a week ago. Like, what's a defense bank? What are you up to? Like, what's all this about?
Well, it was back in the fall that I saw a media article that Canada could be a front runner for this Defense Security and Resilience Bank. And I thought, hang on a minute. If Canada could get this, and this is a multilateral bank being set up by NATO and the allied countries in the Indo-Pacific, then I thought, well, why couldn't Vancouver have it? And so I started having some conversations with people, at Invest Vancouver, for example, and some other private sector business leaders. And then there were other conversations that were happening. So a bunch of us came together and formed this Pacific Security Bank Bid Committee. And we've been hard at work since, I think before Christmas, putting together a bid. And in the meantime, Toronto has put together a bid, and Montreal has. And you might think, well, of course, it's a bank. It should be in Toronto. That's where the TSX is. That's where all the banks are. But it's not just a bank. It's a security instrument. And so when you look at what is required to make this security instrument successful, Vancouver's the strategic choice. We're the only city. We're called like a tri-continental bridge between the EU, Asia Pacific, and the Arctic. It's the only city in Canada where you can conduct business on the same day. We have got all of the other facets that would make this bank successful beyond financial: AI, quantum, cybersecurity, manufacturing. You look at some of the work that's being done at C-SPAN and CFB Esquimalt. And you put that all together, and Vancouver is a very attractive place. We have the consulate corps who could support this, and we have the space ready right now if they wanted to establish the bank right now. It will be sometime in the next year. There's negotiations that have to happen with the NATO countries, and Canada may or may not get it, but it will be up to the Prime Minister to decide which city he wants to put it in if Canada is awarded this opportunity. But when I sit back and I think about it, I think about the future of where this globe is going and where the focus is going to be. A lot of it will be on the Asia Pacific, and we're the gateway. So the bank should be here. And it's been a project that has really unified not only the business community in British Columbia, but, conversations I've had with other colleagues across the country that, we first and foremost wanted in Canada. And then here in British Columbia, we're putting up our hand and we said it should be in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. This is the first time in the conversation so far we've spoken about jobs in Vancouver. And so much of the emphasis right now has been on LNG, has been on critical minerals and mining. And there's no question those create jobs in Vancouver and in the suburbs of Vancouver, but they're not core to those areas. So to hear you talk about in the list of things that we're doing so well in Vancouver, is the province doing enough to drive growth in the Vancouver economy, and what else can be done differently there as part of your 3% target, especially in relation to this sort of concept of the defense bank and other related pieces?
And this bank would be high paying, very select expertise kinds of jobs. And we've heard, up to 3,500. I think it would take some time to grow the bank to that. And definitely some of those core countries across the NATO and the Indo-Pacific countries would bring some of their folks in here, but they would be looking to recruit from our universities and from our industries and sectors. So, we could be looking at more than 1,000 jobs, for example. And what, for politically, I understand why any party, doesn't matter on which spectrum, looks at the province as a whole, as the map, and Vancouver is just one piece of that. But Vancouver is the engine of the province, and we do need those high-paying knowledge jobs here in Vancouver. And the bank's a great example of why we got behind it at the Board of Trade, because it's an incredible economic opportunity. And we need to do more of that. And, there are, I'll give the government another kudo here. It did some good work on tech, and now tech is hubbed here. We have to do more of that. We have to roll out the red carpet to have these headquarters and to have these global companies set up here in Vancouver, or, in Greater Vancouver, Surrey as well. And we have to do what we can to bring those here, because every other jurisdiction is doing what they can to get that business as well.
So on the defense bank, there's can't remember the number, 20, 21 Liberal MPs in British Columbia. Are you expecting them to be out in full force lobbying for this thing? Because I honestly don't hear much from these Liberal MPs in BC. I'd like to hear that they're doing something to fight for the province.
Well, we briefed the committee. The committee briefed the Pacific Caucus last week, early morning for us here out in the West Coast, and we were all there, bright-eyed and bunny-tailed, ready to go. And They were very excited to hear about it, and we talked in great detail. They had also been briefed by Premier Eby, and Premier Eby did brief the Prime Minister, and also Minister Callon had briefed the caucus as well. So, it really has happened over the last week or 2 weeks. So I think now that knowledge is building, and they all committed to being champions of this and trying to get this to British Columbia. Ultimately, it's the Prime Minister who will make this decision if Canada is awarded this opportunity. And so he will have his own criteria that he's making these decisions upon. And we put forward our best case and hope that the Prime Minister will see that.
Well, we could threaten to separate.
It
seems to work.
I think there's enough of that going on in Canada right now.
Well,
I don't
they
think
seem
we
to
need
get what they
add
want when they do that. So, makes me wonder. Let's just switch gears a little bit. BC Conservatives are having a leadership race. And I think we're up to 47 candidates now, 48. Michael, do you got the list, the number? It's at least a dozen, I think. So there's going to be a lot of policy ideas flying around. And, I recall that in the last provincial election, they actually campaigned to increase the size of the deficit. So, and they haven't come up with any
They also
idea.
voted for DRIPA, as did all the parties.
Some of the members who are, Rustad and
Yes.
some of the members, who were there, they don't want to mention that they were BC Liberals,
Right.
But with all this policy debate swirling around, like, what are you hoping to see at the end of the day out of a Conservative opposition that, post May 30th will start to look like the opposition that's going to go into the next election? Like, what kind of approach are you hoping out of them?
Well, one of the best things about leading this organization is that we are vehemently nonpartisan. We're not going to choose a side, and we'll work with any party in government. But what we've seen in British Columbia in the last several years is really a lack of a strong opposition. And a strong opposition is needed, regardless of what party, to help keep government accountable and to bring ideas to the table. And so when I look at this, and I'm quite excited to see some of the candidates put their name forward, including my previous, the man that I succeeded here. So previous leader of the Board of Trade, which I will never go down that path. So that's never happening, but good for him. There are a number of great candidates.
We should talk, Bridgitte. We should talk.
Yeah, no, never.
I will still room in the race.
Never going to happen. But I think it's important to have really good ideas on the table, to have a really robust debate, and then the party members will choose their leader. And then what I'd like to see is a really strong opposition. And then whenever the time happens, and maybe it's sooner than later, given some things that are going on, British Columbians will go to the polls and choose the best leader. And so for us at the Board of Trade, we want to see economic growth at the heart of decision making. Without a strong economy, nobody prospers. And we sort of have lost that literacy over the last, I don't know, maybe decade or a couple of decades. Economic growth became a bad word. And so, understanding that prosperity is prosperity for all. Economic growth allows for government revenues for health and education and daycare and all of those other important services. But governments have just, and even federally, governments are now turning back to the economy and focus on the economy. And it's good, but we need that. I really want to see that as part of the Conservative leadership race. And then whenever we get to an election here in British Columbia.
But, when you look at, I can't remember how many seats we have in Vancouver. Is it 12, 11 or 12, Michael? Something like that. There's no Conservatives, right? Dallas Brody's gone, and they only elected one in the last election. Objectively, in your nonpartisan hat, wearing your nonpartisan hat, do you think the Conservatives have trouble speaking to people in Vancouver and the nearby areas, like connecting? Do they have trouble connecting with your members? Like, are they speaking past them or over them or under them? Or because I mean, it's not obviously the BC Liberals arguably were maybe too much of a mind meld at times with the business community, some would argue. But the Conservatives are a different bunch, right?
I think what's successful in any party, whether it's right or left, is that you've got a big tent and you're bringing together a unified vision. The Conservatives had, in the last iteration of them, had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 or 10 different visions underneath that umbrella, and a lot of what they had to say on the fringes just didn't resonate with our members. And so I think that is the path to success, is like focus on what's important on the economy, get away from that fringe stuff that scares people, quite frankly, and and be reasonable, for goodness sake. Some of the things that have come out, and some of those people are not with the party anymore, but I just thought, I don't know who they're speaking for. I don't know any British Columbians. I don't know any of our members who would want to see focus on those issues, ostrich farming or whatever the heck it might be. So I think it's more about, we're Canadians, we're British Columbians. Most of us are pretty centrist. And so focus on those issues that will really resonate with people in their day-to-day lives, and resonate with business owners and operators to have a better life for their kids and for the province and prosperity for all. And that's the path to success. And somehow the Conservatives and those fringe groups under the Conservative banner forgot that.
Well, and to cap it off here with more election talk, it's the once in 4 year cycle for local government this year. Where does the Board of Trade see itself participating in that process this year? Because obviously there's municipal government makes a big difference on the way businesses operate, certainly in the housing front, but in other ways too.
It's like a kid in a candy store in 2026. We
I
might
know.
get 3 elections.
You
Maybe
might.
there'll be federal, provincial, and municipal, which would keep us on our toes. What we have done in the last municipal election, we'll probably do something again. We tend to focus on the city of Vancouver, although we do look a little bit at Metro Vancouver, and we focus on the issues that the city can really control. And for the city of Vancouver, again, it's getting back to basics. Fix the infrastructure that's failing, fix the roads. Stop talking about the stuff that really isn't in the lane. Get permitting on track. Focus on economic growth. And so we'll be talking to the candidates about that. We'll be putting their information forward to our members so that they can make an informed decision. The city is, we've talked about the Conservatives and even the province, the NDP, sort of losing their way on what matters. So the city of Vancouver has too, and I was on the North Shore, and I've just moved to the city of Vancouver recently, and so I'm seeing it day to day. Focus on what matters, and give those core services to people. That's what they want.
Did the Board of Trade take a position on the 0% tax increase?
We did, in that we never asked for a 0% tax increase, and I remain concerned that 0% is not 0%. And, looking down the line, when we're sitting back in a few months from now, will there be fee increases here and there that will actually, really add up to more than 0%? And so what we want to see is stable property increases, predictable property increases, and the money going to what matters. The Ken Sim administration or ABC administration, there was a big spike up. I think it was 17% over his time in office, including the 0%. And it would be more predictable, if we knew over a 4-year period, or we knew it was going to be 2% or 3%, recognizing that, we are going to have to pay for infrastructure updates. Our members are concerned that 0% is actually, there'll be hidden fees and service increases that will amount to much more than 0%.
I think,
Michael,
one of
what's
the
your
other
take?
interesting things about this year is, of course, we've got 2 major events that are going to put a spotlight on Vancouver: the second year of Web Summit, and then moving into the spring with the World Cup and all eyes here for some of the games and some of the significant games. What's interesting to me is, how does the current administration take advantage of that? And then when we go into a fall election, how are municipal parties and candidates positioning to maximize advantage of that? And I'm curious your thinking in terms of, what does marketing Vancouver look like going forward? Do we have an Olympic size opportunity, and is that something that we should be looking at in terms of what we're looking for from municipal candidates?
We've been a supporter of FIFA since the beginning, and in large part because it is an economic development opportunity. But it is not like the Olympics. And, I worked for the government during the 2010 games. That was a significant economic development opportunity and had legacy projects that benefited the region. FIFA is not that. It is very different. But there are opportunities for economic development. And I've been working behind the scenes with a number of other folks in associations and in a group to identify what those opportunities are. And they're only becoming more known now. Until we know which countries are playing and which games we have, it's a bit hard to have an economic development strategy if you don't know you're going to be working to engage, I don't know, Nigeria or Germany. It's very different. And so now though that work is starting to come together, I think the biggest opportunity for Vancouver and for our region will be the eyes that are going to be on us, which are way more attention paid to FIFA than to the Olympics. So how do we leverage that after the games, after the matches? What are the things that we can do? And one thing that British Columbia and Vancouver used to do really well is we had our unique value proposition, to use some business jargon. And we've lost our way on that. We need to explain to the world what's our elevator pitch on why you would want to come and invest in Vancouver and in British Columbia. We need to really hone that and to show our strengths over FIFA and in the months that follow FIFA. And I think by doing things like talking about the opportunities in mining and LNG, to show that we are expediting permitting, that we've got major projects happening, and to be able to really showcase British Columbia as a place to do business, that will be the legacy, but it's going to take a lot of work.
Final question, I'll stick to soccer. What's your level of concern about the Whitecaps and sticking around Vancouver?
Yeah, great level of concern. I was around when we lost the Grizzlies, and different because we didn't have the Grizzlies that long and it was NBA, but the Whitecaps are part of our community and foundational to bringing people together in celebration and sport and unity. And this is a big problem. We've got to get this sorted out. But I'd also say that, yes, the government's going to have to come to the table to sort this out, and the team has got some of the financial pieces to sort out. It would be a real shame for our community to lose something like the Whitecaps, as it would be to lose something like the Canucks, because I know the Canucks also don't have a practice facility, and that's, a bit of a contention for them. Sports and music, those are the things that bring us together aside from politics, and I'd hate to see it gone. Really would. I'd hate to see the Whitecaps leave.
Okay, well, lots on your plate coming up this year, Bridgitte. We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to come in and give us an update. And will you be at lockup in Victoria?
I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mike. Okay. We're going to have our report card ready, so I'll see you there.
I will see you there. Michael, will you be in lockup?
I will be.
Okay. Well, we could have an extended edition, deep cuts of Hotel Pacifico there behind the...
Deep cuts is a good metaphor.
Behind the Iron Curtain of the lockup.
Yeah, we'll compare notes.
Okay, Bridgitte, thanks for dropping by. Uber Eats might bring dinner, but this hydrogen truck is delivering the future. That's right. A hydrogen-powered grocery truck has been driving around BC. This is a full-size Class 8 truck that made real deliveries between the Lower Mainland and Squamish. The demonstration brings together a broad partnership that includes our sponsor, Fortis BC, Loblaws, H-Tech, the BC Trucking Association, Transport Canada, and the province of BC. Together, they have launched the first sustained commercial demonstration of a hydrogen-fueled heavy-duty truck in the province. The goal is simple: see how this technology actually performs when it has to deal with hills, traffic, weather, and deadlines, just like every other truck on the road. Since mid-October of last year, it's logged hundreds of kilometers and has generated real-world data on things like range, fueling, and performance. Fortis BC is supporting the project through its Clean Growth Innovation Fund to help make the demonstration possible. As part of a broader effort to explore lower carbon solutions for sectors that are especially tough to decarbonize, and heavy-duty trucking is right at the top of that list. The insights from this pilot will help inform future decisions about hydrogen vehicles and infrastructure in BC. It's a practical, real-world example of how collaboration and innovation can move the conversation on lower emission transportation forward. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. Well, the two Michaels are back in the strategy suite, ready to chew over the political happenings of the week here. Good little tune up there with Bridgitte. So let's recap what's happening in the time ahead. Speech from the throne on February 12th, which is the day that all British Columbians gather around the television set to, well, 1:30, 1:45 p.m. on a Thursday, take time off work to watch the Lieutenant Governor read, without looking up, a very dry speech. And then we have the budget on February 17th, of which you and I will be incarcerated for half the day while we review that document. So a busy week for the government in terms of agenda setting.
It's been a busy month in terms of getting ready for the budget with the challenges we've talked about earlier, and we'll get into more here. But then, yeah, very busy 5 days and a unique coming back to the House. They're going to have the throne speech on the Thursday. The House won't sit Friday, and then the next day it sits, we will have the budget.
So Emily Lowen, the leader of the Greens, kind of threw down the gauntlet this week. The Greens turned red when it came to, I was calling it CASA, but I guess it's CARGA. Was CARGA? What's that stand for? Confidence and something green.
Something Green Alliance. I don't.
There's no alliance anymore.
No alliance. There's no alliance. It's arguable there ever was one.
So some of the snippets I caught here was Premier Eby saying, "We have the votes." Raj Chauhan will be the busiest guy in Victoria. He's not allowed to pull a Corky Evans and go out and get a ham sandwich when a vote's coming up. He has to be sitting in his chair to break those 46 votes. Emily Lowen says she's not interested in more flip-flopping and political cowardice from David Eby. A government that is willing to weaken Indigenous rights for political expediency cannot expect our support. Boom. Green MLA Rob Botterill. The consequences of this government's fiscal choices shouldn't be downloaded onto working British Columbians. I'm not exactly sure who they should be downloaded to. Non-working British Columbians, perhaps.
Non-working British Columbians.
But it appeared that Botterill and Valeria were side by side with the Green leader, agreeing with this termination of the deal, because there has been some chatter, perhaps started by me, that maybe one or both might end up in the NDP caucus at some point, but no evidence of that yet.
I mean, the early look of this is that with Emily Lowen as leader, they've decided to be the left-wing opposition to the NDP, not necessarily the Green opposition. The issues on which they're upset about, some of them are classic Green issues, like the government's efforts to revive the forest industry, if they are to have any, are going to run counter to the agreement with the Greens. And on Indigenous relations, I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity for the government here in terms of how it has to address the DRIPA challenges that it has in front of it. And clearly, Lowen and the two Green MLAs are not going to be supportive of anything that would weaken DRIPA, and it makes it a very interesting session for the NDP on that side when fixing DRIPA is arguably the second most important thing it's going to do in this term.
They're picking their lane, and fair enough. It's maybe there's a low ceiling to it, but maybe they get more out of their base by firing them up. I'm talking about the Greens. And this isn't a surprise based on where she was positioned during the leadership race. But what do you think, like on the throne speech and the narrative that the government's going to try to put forward in the months ahead? What do you think are the 2 or 3 kind of top selling points that they're going to try and promote?
So I think the challenge for this government coming forward is it doesn't have money to spend on a new agenda. And it hasn't defined an agenda, I think, well enough so far. And it's going to have to attempt to do that through the spring. So I think the throne speech is going to actually probably be a look back at all of the things government has done that it believes have added value for British Columbians and added value for the economy. So we'll see. I expect a lot of boasting about the projects that have been approved, the accelerated permitting process, some of the measures that have been taken to add new doctors, all of those sorts of things. I think we'll see a lot of boasting about. And then I think from there, we'll see a real tough times message to frame up the budget, and that government is going to have to really tighten its belt while working to protect the things that matter to ordinary British Columbians. But much like the budget, not an enviable throne speech to be drafting either at this time.
So, in light of that, I mean, it's never really translated into immediate political consequences. But our old friend Von Palmer has been pretty critical of the government's fiscal record, including this week. That's one vulnerability that they have. Ongoing handling of the Indigenous file is another vulnerability. Taking on friendly fire from Labor allies like there was this morning, is just another sign of challenges that are out there. Yet, they lead in the polls, and Premier Eby continues to have over 40% favorability rating. I haven't seen any poll where he's under 40%. So, what's the secret? It's kind of defying the laws of nature.
Defying the laws of nature, the laws of politics. I mean, if we're honest, he's got an opposition that has not been coordinated in its response, that has been focused, I think, a lot on issues, even in the leadership race, and we'll get to talking about that aren't top of mind priorities for British Columbians. I think the deficit issue is one that insiders care about, and the business community cares about. I don't think average British Columbians yet care about it. When they will care about it is when they start seeing it impact the services that they rely on, or they see their taxes going up to pay for it. So I think deficit is still an insider issue that is not hurting the government yet. And the challenge for the government is going to be, how does it not hurt itself as they go to tackle this deficit? But it's also been a very boring government in many ways, and you and I both know that boring often is a path to near re-election or small victories.
I would argue we see more of David Eby on the news than we ever saw of Christy Clark. Like he is front center 3 times a week. And he, as the point Megs has made time and again, is that when he does do media, he tends to hang around for a lot of questions, which drives more coverage, right? So it is a very leader-focused political agenda, which most parties are, but especially in this case. And he seems to be holding up his end of the bargain by keeping his popularity at a winnable level relative to other leaders that have gone through tough times.
Well, yeah, and look, I think John Horgan, in his time as a New Democrat, and I'll just speak to New Democrats here, he was the master of the pivot in the sense that he could maximize benefit from pivoting. The museum issue was one of the classic ones, but on a relatively minor issue, where Premier Eby has had to pivot on some pretty substantive issues, and he hasn't pivoted in a mild way. He has pivoted in a way, if you think about drug legalization, if you think about what's coming on DRIPA likely, on major issues that are very important to the left-wing base of the New Democrats, but that makes sense to average British Columbians. Carbon tax, massive change in policy there.
Involuntary care probably coming into
involuntary care, right? The list goes on. And these all hurt at the left-wing flank of the NDP, no question. But the big volume of voters is in the middle, and I've heard from a number of folks who, even if they think it's been inelegant how David has pivoted as premier on some of these issues, they appreciate that he has. And so some of the holding of that core may relate to that.
But the left wing, the left wing of the left wing, the NDP, it really seems to be at its nadir right now. Like it really seems to be like I've never seen it less influential on a national level, right? Like they just got hammered in the last federal election, going through a leadership convention federally right now, which is not exactly capturing hearts and minds. Avi Lewis may well be the next leader. Do you think we're going to see it? Emily Loan might be an example of this. Do you think we're going to see the left kind of return with more force in the next year in terms of, being a bit scrappier and being a little less accepting of these compromises?
I actually don't, Mike. I'll tell you this. We used to have these debates, and when Horgan first became leader, as he charted a path to the center, there were those who screamed that we would lose the base, but it turned out that most New Democrats, even New Democrat activists, enjoyed having the tools of power and the ability to achieve things more than they did having the tools to scream from the sidelines. And so even if the base and some of the lefter NDPers may be disappointed in some of those things that happen, at the end of the day, they remain aligned with the government of the day. You talk about the federal party, Avi Lewis, he may win, but from what I understand, he failed to do what he needed to do in the sign-up period. He did not achieve a majority through signups. And so it is going to be the members of the federal NDP who were members before the race started, who are largely going to decide the federal race. And so it makes it interesting from an Avi versus everybody else perspective. So we may even see the federal party, we may not, Avi may come through, but we may see the federal NDP choose practical over ideological as well.
Okay, well, look forward to that. Now, switching gears to DRIPA, and we talked recently on this pod about Geoff Plant's op-ed in the Northern Beat. And this week, we have another clipping of the week. This time it's from another Geoff, and another Geoff from the Attorney General branch, Geoff Moyes, who's retired as a lawyer in the Attorney General branch. He's now part of something called the Public Land Use Society. He wrote an op-ed in response to Plant. Moyes is basically saying, scrap on DRIPA and DRIPA, return reconciliation to the constitutional framework of Section 35, pursue formal, transparent, treaty-based negotiations that balance Indigenous rights, private property, and public interest. In particular, with regard to Plant, this is the two Geoffs really throwing darts at each other, and hopefully Geoff Meigs doesn't get caught in the crossfire with all these Geoffs floating around.
The Michaels are okay so far.
The two Michaels are, avoiding detention. Moyes says, in regards to Plant, with the greatest respect to my former colleague, and you know what's coming after that line, this is a nonsensical analysis of consent and nothing short of supporting de facto Aboriginal veto ability over government decision-making. He goes on to say, UNDRIP, in fact, establishes rights in land ownership, use, and decision-making over resources that run roughshod over democratic governance, and says that the DRIPA legislation is deeply flawed and haphazardly implemented. Now, it's a long piece, and I direct people to go read it in the Northern Beat rather than take my Cole's notes from it. It's very complicated stuff. We can't really expect voters to know the ins and outs of it. God knows those of us who are supposed to know the ins and outs of it barely know the ins and outs of any of it. So, Michael, how do you think all of this, here we have dueling op-eds that, probably aren't going to be read by that many people, but they represent holes in the debate. How do you think this is going to play out in the months ahead in the court of public opinion, as opposed to the court of law?
Look, the core issue at stake for the EB government as they navigate this is, can they give the average British Columbia confidence that DRIPA, in its current or amended form, is not going to take away their property, their rights, their well-being, that they're not going to lose as a result of DRIPA and or Section 35 overall. And look, the public don't understand the nuance between the two. And you can see based on the two Geoffs that there's disagreement about the nuance between the two, and the public are never going to be able to engage in a way that they're clear on it. I've spent countless hours in rooms, and I'm not clear on what the right outcome here is, other than to say that government has to take measures to give ordinary people confidence that they're not going to lose because of this. And that's a really challenging dance.
So let's just, for argument's sake, say that Caroline Elliott's going to be the next leader of the BC Conservatives. Okay, fine. The other 11, you can scream and yell about that. This is just a scenario. We're just and I haven't declared her the victor yet. Don't worry. But let's just say Caroline becomes the next leader, and she's been very black and white's one way to put it, but she's picked her lane on this issue. She's wants DRIPA repealed, but she's written a lot about it. She's has some credibility as someone who is not afraid to speak up on it from an intellectual basis on it. And then you have the NDP government. And so come June, who's better positioned on it, do you think?
Oh, I think right now there's no question that whichever Conservative leader wins is politically better positioned.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is, and we'll talk a bit about session more here, but the two issues on which David Eby has to survive the session are the budget and then DRIPA. But under no circumstance do you want to go to an election where the two core issues are a massive budget deficit and uncertainty on property ownership and rights in the face of perceptions around these recent court decisions. So the Premier really has to do the work, not just during session, but in the months that follow, before he even contemplates going to an election, to take those issues off the table and away from folks like Caroline Elliott. I mean, her position at the end of the day is not dissimilar to what Moise advocates for, but perhaps with a little more naivete, I would say, which is that you can't eliminate DRIPA and think that these challenges go away. Section 35 interpretations are at the core of the challenges. They're not provincially created challenges. It's not to say that DRIPA legislation hasn't been interpreted in ways that maybe add to them, but from a property rights uncertainty perspective, in the absence of treaties, it doesn't go away by Caroline Elliott taking power and eliminating DRIPA legislation. Those challenges, they remain, and I keep saying challenges, there are also opportunities here. We've seen where treaties have been negotiated, incredible development unleashed. The Silicims project is an example of where a treated nation is advancing a project that's going to be very significant for nation building in Canada. But I would say, until the Premier has done the work to resolve the uncertainties to the extent possible and to redefine the narrative, this is not an issue he should want to go to an election facing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's who's come June or whenever that time is, who seems more reasonable, who's more pragmatic. But even then, I mean, we talked about Eby's favorable numbers, and I think he's generally seen as likable enough by a lot of voters. I'd be concerned if I were the NDP just about people that may not show up in the polls as much, that people are more concerned about the First Nation issue than even the polls pick up. Because it's not the type of thing some people, especially moderates, want to voice, but they may just think we need to do a course correction. Now, there's a lot of positive things that can be talked about, as Bridgitte was saying earlier, on economic reconciliation that are maybe moving people to the positive examples of where things are getting done, these major projects are getting done. There's Indigenous proponents of LNG terminals, all that kind of stuff. So anyways, it's going to take a lot of narrative shaping in the next few months for the government to protect itself on it. And the Conservatives have work to do too, that they look like they're a pair of responsible hands to take over the enterprise if they get that opportunity.
Yeah, in the same way as Premier Eby has to show certainty, and I think if we look where the Cowichan decision was, which was Richmond, I think there's a if you look along that area, that's an area where the NDP is going to have particular challenge in redefining the narrative. But by the same token, to your point, if the Conservatives take a position that is so dramatically opposite that they could find themselves and the NDP able to position them as threatening the reconciliation that has advanced these things. Again, I don't think anyone wants to or should want to go to an election on it, but the Conservatives have risk here as well. It's not a slam dunk for them. But I do agree that the polls are not reflecting the level of concern average British Columbians have, and that concern has got to be a priority for David to address.
The opening in the middle seems so wide that you could drive a truck through it, except it appears that the truck is automated and there's no driver. So it's a Waymo. So I'm not sure
Hopefully it's a
anyone's gonna.
Waymo where the power hasn't gone out in San Francisco.
So I'm not sure anyone's going to harness that opportunity in the near term. Well, the return of Rustad. He caused a stir in the last week that he's apparently taken out an application package for the BC Conservative leadership, and then I think with some glee tweeted out no comment, and got people talking. I noticed that there's an op-ed out saying, "Don't run, John," and so forth. Well, if I'm him, I might also like to have a little fun with this and torture people a little bit. I did look up examples of people who have been leader and run for leader again, and it's not a pathway to redemption for most. Starting with John Diefenbaker, who finished sixth when he sought his old job. I was involved in the 1993 leadership in BC, where Gordon Campbell defeated two former leaders of the BC Liberal Party, Gordon Wilson, Gordon Gibson. Joe Clark tried, he failed. Preston Manning tried to win his job. He lost to Stockwell Day, who tried to win his old job, who lost to Stephen Harper. So you have to get to Robert Bourassa before you find one that really works. So with all that said, do we? I mean, I don't know. Do we think Rustad would have any chance if he wins again? It's hard to believe it, right?
I mean, it's hard to believe he can win the race, and it's hard to believe he would stand a chance were he to win the race. But there's also, as you noted earlier, we had 11 or 12 candidates if he joins, and 12 candidates on a preferential ballot with weighted ridings.
Yeah.
And really, no disrespect to Caroline or Ian or Yuri, who I think are the three who are doing the most work so far in the campaign. None of them really stand out as obvious stars in a campaign, especially from the right-wing coalition, right? When it was Gordon Campbell, he had been mayor of Vancouver, he'd put in the work. It was clear he was the right choice if they were going to take power. Christy Clark was both an absolute pit bull in opposition and then a very effective cabinet minister. And so, you had these obvious choices for successor and leader of that coalition. And I don't think there is one in this race. And there isn't one that seems obvious to consolidate votes, power, authority within that movement. And so it leaves a window, I think, open for John Rustad to come up the middle potentially on third, fourth, or fifth place votes. But I would. Everybody has that avenue in this
or
race.
Be a factor, or be an influencer, or
exactly.
try to nudge things, be relevant.
Well, and he doesn't go away, Mike, right? Like usually if you're deposed as leader, you kind of go have a little quiet time in the corner. And he has been, I would say, almost more active on Twitter, more active on policy since ceasing to be leader than he even was while he was leader. So it's clear he intends to have an effect and an influence. And as you say, whether he enters the race or not, he's already having fun and maybe a little bit of retribution by playing these games as he heads into the race here, or doesn't.
Well, we have seen Bruce Banman jump in the race in the last week or so. We've seen Steve Cooner from Richmond, Queensboro, Attorney General critic, jump in the race. CRC Moore from Caucus get in. I wouldn't rule out more. There's lots of time. I keep calling on the younger generation to who've got some upside to jump in. So far, my pleas have gone unresponded to. So, maybe we'll have to settle for 12 candidates.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were some in that caucus I think that we expected to see step up in this round, and for whatever reasons, whether it's family, whether it's the insanity of the politics they're facing within that race right now, a few of them have decided not to, and they would have been good additions to the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I still personally think Caroline's stands out the most as a, first of all, it's partly because she's a woman. Most of these guys are, except for Carrie Lynn Finley, they're all men. She's younger. She's staked out some turf. She's got a good social media game. Um, she brought in some badass campaign manager from Toronto. Like she's got, she's kind of standing out compared to some of these candidates that are just jumping on the ballot. Um, but it's hard to know how she's really doing. And, Ian Black, I think provides a counterpoint to her in terms of a little bit more of a perceived moderate, more establishment figure who's, if somebody doesn't want to take a chance on someone who's never been elected before and doesn't maybe arguably have as much career experience, Ian Black could be safe harbor in a storm. I would have thought Peter Millibar would be more in that conversation, but honestly, I just don't feel a lot of energy coming out of that campaign so far. It's early days and that they could turn a corner perhaps, but I think Peter needs to inject himself into the front runner conversation, and I just don't think he's there yet.
It felt to me like Ian moved quickly enough and sharply enough that he cornered that BC Liberal value set, the big
Yeah.
tent BC Liberal value set crew early on. And that left less room for someone like Peter to step in and pull that off. Um, but I think they're obviously going to be likely one and two. Their votes will be one and two choices, largely. I think on a
Possibly.
ballot, possibly.
I think there's a bit of a Venn diagram between Ian's and Caroline's too. And
Yeah, yeah,
then arguably maybe the most aggressive candidate is Yuri Fulmer, who is doing some things that are targeted, and he's put out a social media thing called Free the Zins. I had to look it up. The Zins are these nicotine pouches that Philip Morris manufactures and sells in the United States, and they're not allowed in Canada. I don't think they're allowed up here. So the federal conservatives have a campaign to free the Zins, and Yuri's coming backdrafting on that, and it's a very focused thing on younger males. It's a cultural thing. Jenny
yeah.
Burns talked about it um, publicly as a segment, right? As a target group. So I just thought, well, that's interesting that he's doing that. Um,
Is
and
the Zins the gun rights of this campaign? Is that what he's hoping?
well, there's gun rights too happening with Sheldon Clare.
Yeah,
But everyone's looking for a little pocket, right? And I think micro targeting and trying to get, and I'm frankly always favor the more broader narratives and the lift everyone's boat at the same time and try to inspire people. But these approaches are a little more like 100 memberships here, 20 memberships here, and try to turn people on that basis. But I think if someone's joining a political party and voting on the basis of availability of Zin, I just not sure that's it's maybe a piece of the puzzle, but it's like, oh boy, it's not what I was
yeah,
put
or
on earth to do, that's for sure.
I mean, even though he ran for the Conservatives, he does have some work to do shoring up his conservative credentials uh, in terms of the more right wing elements of the Conservative Party. So maybe that's his play there. Interestingly, I think he's the one who's done the most work so far in terms of getting out and being about. I've seen him in communities all around
Yuri
the
Fulmer.
province. Yuri Fulmer,
Yeah,
10,
yeah, no,
15
I think he
people in
has
the
been
room.
aggressive.
Like
Yeah.
he is it's surprised me how effectively he has played outside of the Lower Mainland and so quickly. Now, whether again is signing up 5 or 10 people at a time in these town hall meetings enough? If they go sign a few up, it might be. He could end up. He could end up a dark horse, especially coming out of nowhere in a sense, versus the two considered establishment candidates, Ian and Caroline.
Well, he strikes me as a guy who's prepared to do what it takes, right?
Yeah.
And that will lead to attacks of maybe being disingenuous, because he was attacking Caroline for not being a real conservative. And it's like, okay, well, is that really who Yuri Fulmer is? But
Yeah.
maybe. Anyways, we'll see. There's lots of time ahead of us. But Michael, you put in a good shift here, so why don't we come on down to the mini bar and
All right.
have a drink? So what do you have a raise a glass or take a shot or both, or what are you thinking?
All I've got is I've got some delicious water here that I'll enjoy with you.
Yeah. Well, what do you want to toast? What's on your list?
What's on my list to toast? Here's what's on my list. That we find amendments to DRIPA in the session ahead that keep the economy moving and don't set reconciliation back. Not
Okay.
ambitious at all.
Yeah. Boy, you might need a few bottles.
Or maybe I had a few bottles thinking that was possible, but
You want to take a shot at anybody as well, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. Um, I'm going to stay pretty high level this week. I'm going to raise a glass to our Olympians. Where the Winter Olympics are upon us. I haven't had a chance to check a lot of it out yet, but there's always some great stories, and particularly British Columbians, not just Canadians, but British Columbians are out there doing their thing. And to the point you made earlier with Bridgitte about FIFA, I don't think we know what's coming yet on this FIFA later this year. Like, I think it's going to hit us like a ton of bricks. Like, it's going to be a big deal in Vancouver. It's going to be exciting, but it's going to be felt in terms of logistics and airports and roads and everything like that. So um, I'll raise a glass to our state of anticipation and readiness that we're going to need.
State of readiness to basically hosting, it's basically hosting 7 major Taylor Swift concerts back to back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
Right. That is the impact of what the World Cup is going to be here, and even bigger than that, probably.
It's a big investment that the provincial government was initially reluctant to be a part of and then pivoted. Horgan pivoted on it ultimately. So we'll see if that pivot was worth all the cost and all the upset about it. But as Bridgette's point is that these things can have a big payoff in terms of international brand. I also make a little, since we're on Olympic theme too, a little raise a glass to Michelle Stilwell. I haven't talked to her in a while, but one of the great Paralympian athletes. I always think about her at times of Olympics. She was definitely probably the greatest athlete ever to serve in the BC legislature in terms of decorated medals. So, Michelle, I hope you're
Yep.
enjoying the Olympics too.
I join you in that. Great athlete and a great minister as well. So.
Right. And I think Jagrup Brar he was on the national team of India, wasn't he?
Was he on the national team of India?
Am I making that up? I thought maybe
I
he played
don't know that.
basketball. Did he play basketball?
He might have been.
Yeah.
I mean, Minister of
Thinking about
Job,
all of our parliamentary athletes here.
Ravi Kalon, a 2-time Olympian.
Oh yeah, Ravi Kalon. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to do the tour. So we'll have a Hall of Fame of political people who actually did something in sports. That'd be a good. There we go. Themed episode coming to a podcast near you. So thanks to Bridgitte Anderson and to you, Michael, for visiting Hotel Pacifico this week. Thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to bring this episode to you for free. We'll see you next week. BC, you can never leave.